The officer's hand was already on the door handle before I could roll down the window. "Step out of the vehicle. Now." I didn't argue. I'd seen enough crime documentaries to know that arguing with a man whose right hand was resting on the grip of a holstered weapon was not a productive use of anyone's time. I put both hands on the steering wheel, kept them visible, and pushed the door open with my elbow the way I'd once seen someone do in a movie about wrongful convictions. I remember thinking, in that strange, crystalline way your brain works when your body is running on pure adrenaline, that I finally understood why they made so many of those movies. Because this was happening. To me, on a Tuesday. There were 2 patrol cars parked at angles behind my Subaru, their lights painting the wet asphalt in alternating red and blue. A second officer was already coming around the passenger side. The first one told me to keep my hands where he could see them. I did. He told me to turn around and face the hood. I did that too. When the handcuffs closed around my wrists, the click was so small, so ordinary, so completely out of proportion to what it meant for my life, that I almost laughed. Almost. "You're being detained in connection with a federal wire fraud investigation," the first officer said. "We'll explain more at the station." Federal. Wire fraud. Those 2 words sat in my chest like stones dropped into still water, and I felt the ripples moving outward through every plan I had ever made for myself, the promotion I'd worked 4 years for, the mortgage I'd signed 6 months ago, the professional license that was the whole reason I'd spent a decade eating instant noodles in graduate school. All of it. Underwater. Before I even understood why. I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest of this. I am a forensic accountant. I have spent my entire career finding the places where numbers lie. I know exactly how fraud works. I know the paper trails it leaves and the ways people try to erase them. I know what desperation looks like when it's been laundered through a spreadsheet. So when I tell you that I did not see this coming, I need you to understand that this is not the confession of a naive woman who trusted blindly. This is something worse. This is the confession of a woman who looked directly at the evidence and convinced herself it meant something else, because the alternative was a thing she could not bring herself to name. My husband and I had been married for 7 years. We met at a conference in Chicago. He was presenting a paper on municipal bond structures. I was there representing my firm. He had a way of explaining complicated things simply, without making you feel like the simplicity was condescending. I found that rare. Still do. We dated for 2 years, got married in a small ceremony in my mother's backyard in Virginia, bought the house in Portland 2 years after that. We did not have children yet, though we had talked about it. We had a dog named after a Supreme Court justice. We had inside jokes about tax codes. From the outside, we looked like exactly what we were, 2 people who had built something careful and real together. Or so I believed. The federal investigation, as it was explained to me in a gray-walled room at the Portland field office by a special agent who kept referring to me as Miss, rather than by my first name, concerned a series of fraudulent consulting invoices totaling $412,000, submitted over 18 months to 3 separate municipal clients. The invoices were for services that were never rendered. The consulting firm that submitted them existed only on paper. It had been registered 11 months ago in Delaware, using my professional license number, my CPA credentials, and my digital signature on the incorporation documents. My digital signature. I sat in that room and I listened to the agent explain how the money had moved through the shell company into an account, converted partially to cryptocurrency, partially withdrawn in cash, and I felt something strange happening inside me. Not panic, something quieter than panic. Something that felt almost like recognition, the way you feel when you finally see the answer to a problem you've been working on for weeks. Except the answer is terrible, and the problem is your marriage. "I didn't do this," I said. The agent looked at me the way people look at someone who has just said exactly what they expected them to say. "Miss Crawford," she said, "your license number is on every document. Your signature is on the incorporation filing. We have email correspondence from an account registered in your name, authorizing the final 2 wire transfers." "What email account?" She slid a printed page across the table. The address was close to mine, almost identical. 1 letter transposed in the middle. Not my account. Close enough that anyone scanning quickly might not notice. I stared at it and felt the stones settling further. "I've never seen this address before," I said. "This is not my account." "We'd like to go over the digital records with you in more detail," she said. "We'd also like to understand your current financial situation. We have records indicating significant cash deposits into a joint account in the months preceding." "How much?" I said. She looked at her file. "Approximately $80,000 across 14 months. I thought about that. I thought about the account. It was technically a joint account. We'd opened it when we bought the house, for shared expenses. I barely used it. My direct deposit went to my personal checking. My husband had set up the joint account, managed it, paid the utilities from it. I looked at the statements maybe twice a year. I had looked at it in February. It had seemed normal. I asked if I could make a phone call. They let me call my attorney a woman I knew professionally, not personally, but who I trusted, which in that moment mattered more than warmth. While I waited for her to arrive, I sat in that gray room and I made myself think, not feel, think. Because I am a forensic accountant, and this is what we do. We go back to the beginning. We find the first irregular entry. We trace the line forward until we find where it breaks. My husband had set up the joint account. My husband managed all the household finances, not because I was incapable, but because he had offered, early in our marriage, and I had accepted because I trusted him, and because my own work hours were brutal. He had access to my laptop. He knew my work passwords not because I'd given them to him explicitly, but because I had, over years, mentioned them in passing, typed them in front of him, stored them in a shared password manager we'd set up together. He was a financial professional. He understood digital signatures. He understood how to register a shell corporation. He understood exactly what kind of evidence would be traceable. And he understood exactly whose name should be on it. My attorney arrived. She listened to everything. She asked the agent to clarify what evidence they were treating as dispositive and what was still under investigation. Then she turned to me and asked me, in front of the agent, to walk through my professional activities for the past 18 months. Not because she doubted me, because she wanted it on the record. I told them everything I remembered, the clients I had actually worked for, the projects, the billing records. I told them that I had not billed any municipal client for consulting in the past 18 months because I had been on an internal audit assignment at my firm that was confidential and non-client facing. My billing records would show 0 external client hours for that entire period. I told them they could verify this with my firm's billing system and with my supervisor. I told them that a forensic examination of my actual work laptop, not the shell company's email account, my laptop would show no activity related to these invoices. I told them the digital signature on the incorporation document could be verified against my actual signing certificate, which had a timestamp log, and that log would show it had not been used on that date. The agent wrote things down. My attorney asked that I not be charged pending further investigation. The agent said she would relay the request. They released me on my own recognizance, pending a follow-up interview in 72 hours. I drove home. My hands were steady on the wheel. I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a long time, watching the light in the living room window. He was home. His car was in the garage. I could see the blue flicker of the television through the curtain. I did not go inside. I called my sister instead, not because she was the most logical person to call, but because she was the person I trusted most in the world to not ask me questions I wasn't ready to answer yet. She came and picked me up. I slept on her couch. I did not sleep well. In the morning, I started from the beginning. I want to be precise about this, because precision matters, and because I want you to understand that what I did next was not revenge. It was not even anger, though the anger was there, a low and constant pressure behind everything I did for the next 4 days. What it was work. The same work I had done for clients for 15 years, finding the place where the numbers stopped adding up. The first thing I did was request my own credit report. Then my professional license activity log most people don't know. You can request this, but every time your license number is used on a document filed with a state agency, it generates a record. Mine showed 11 uses in the past 14 months that I had not authorized. 11. The shell company filing was one of them. The others were associated with a second entity I hadn't even known existed. A real estate holding company, also in Delaware, also registered using my credentials. My husband had not just built one false structure, he had built 2. I called a colleague, a forensic IT specialist I had worked with on several fraud cases, and I explained the situation in the flattest possible terms. I told her what I needed. She told me it was possible and walked me through how to request a formal examination of the email account metadata from the provider. The email account that was almost, but not quite mine. The one the agent had shown me. It took 36 hours. The provider's records showed that the account had been created from a specific device. The device ID was associated with an IP address. The IP address was associated with a location. The location was a coffee shop 4 blocks from our house, one my husband went to every Saturday morning. The account had been created on a Saturday morning, 14 months ago. I wrote that down. The second thing I requested was the full transaction history of the joint account. Not the summary, the raw transaction data, every line with timestamps. I sat with it for 6 hours. I found the deposits the agent had mentioned. I also found something she hadn't mentioned, or perhaps hadn't noticed yet. The deposits had consistent timing. They came in roughly 6 weeks after each fraudulent invoice was submitted. The lag was consistent with how long it takes a municipal accounts payable department to process and disperse payment on a consulting invoice. Someone who understood municipal payment timelines would know that lag. My husband had spent 8 years consulting for municipal bond issuers before he moved to the private sector. He knew that lag the way I know audit cycles. I wrote that down too. On the third day, I did the thing that cost me the most. I went back into our shared password manager. I still had access, and I looked at what else was stored there. I found a login I didn't recognize. It was for a cryptocurrency exchange. The username was a variation of my husband's middle name. I could not access the account itself, but the existence of the login in our shared vault, in an account we had opened together, meant that it was recoverable by a forensic examiner. It meant it existed. It meant he had been sloppy, or confident, or both. I called my attorney and told her everything I had found. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You understand that everything you found on your own is going to need to be independently verified by investigators to be admissible." "I know," I said. "I'm not building a court case. I'm building a roadmap." She understood the difference. On the fourth day, I met with the federal agent again. My attorney was with me. I brought a 12-page summary document, formatted the way I would format a fraud analysis memo for a client, laying out every piece of information I had found, with source citations, timestamps, and a chronological narrative of how the fraud had been structured. I explained the email account and the device ID and the coffee shop and the IP address. I explained the timing pattern in the deposits. I explained the second Delaware entity. I explained the cryptocurrency exchange login in our shared vault. The agent read the document while I sat across from her. She asked clarifying questions. I answered them. She asked how I had obtained the provider metadata for the email account. I told her I had requested it formally through the provider's law enforcement request portal, using a formal written request on my attorney's letterhead, arguing that I was a victim of identity theft and had standing to request records associated with an account created using my personal information, which was true, which was exactly the kind of thing someone who knew how these systems worked would know how to do. She asked me to give her 48 hours. It took 32. My husband was arrested on a Thursday morning at the same coffee shop 4 blocks from our house, where he went every Saturday and apparently some Thursdays too. I know this because my attorney called me while I was sitting in my car in the parking lot of a grocery store, buying time, trying not to be at home when it happened. The agent told my attorney that the forensic examination of my husband's work laptop had confirmed what I had found. The email account had been accessed from that device. The incorporation documents for both entities had been drafted on that device. There were internal memos. He had actually written internal memos to himself, as though he were running a real company that laid out the billing schedule, the invoice amounts, and the projected timeline for each payment. He had also written, in one of those memos, a note reminding himself to make sure the email account was consistent with her naming convention. Her. He had written the word her. I sat in that parking lot for a long time after my attorney hung up. A woman pushed a cart past my car with a toddler in the basket, and the toddler waved at me, and I waved back, and then I cried for about 4 minutes. Not because I was sad, exactly. Because my body needed to do something with everything that had been building for 5 days, and crying was the most available option. Then I went inside and bought groceries, because I had not eaten a real meal since Monday. The federal investigation moved faster after that, the way these things do when the evidence is organized and the timeline is clear. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed charges 6 weeks later. Wire fraud, money laundering, identity theft, aggravated identity theft, which carries a mandatory 2-year sentence on top of anything else, and computer fraud for accessing accounts in my name without authorization. The second Delaware entity, the real estate holding company, turned out to be even worse than I had initially found. He had used it to move money through a series of property transactions, none of them real, all of them paper, in a way that suggested he had been planning this for longer than 14 months, much longer. The government's forensic accountants and I felt something deeply strange about that phrase, the government's forensic accountants. Doing for the government what I had done for clients for 15 years, found the earliest related transaction dated to 9 months before we bought the house, 9 months before we signed a mortgage together. I don't know exactly when he decided to do this. I don't know if there was a moment, a specific calculation, where he looked at me and saw an opportunity, rather than a person. I don't know if he ever saw me as both. These are not questions I have found useful to sit with. What I know is what the evidence shows. What the evidence shows is that he built something deliberately, carefully, and over a long period of time, using my name, my credentials, my professional reputation, the things I had spent a decade building as the raw materials. He had chosen me. I eventually understood, not despite the fact that I was a forensic accountant, but partly because of it, because my professional credibility made the fraudulent invoices more plausible. Because a woman with my credentials, billing municipal clients for consulting work, would not raise flags the way a less established name might, because he understood exactly what kind of professional armor I wore, and he had used it as his shield. He pled guilty 8 months later. Federal plea agreements are public documents, so I can tell you that the terms included a recommended sentence of 11 years, full restitution of all funds, roughly $430,000, when the second entity's transactions were included, forfeiture of all cryptocurrency holdings, and a permanent bar from working in any financial advisory or consulting capacity. His firm put out a brief statement saying he was no longer employed there. His parents, who had known him for 41 years and apparently knew nothing about any of this, or so they said, and I choose to believe them, because believing otherwise is not something I have the energy for, sent me a handwritten note that I have not yet decided what to do with. The professional license activity log was corrected. The fraudulent entities were dissolved. The 3 municipal clients who had, it turned out, been victims too, their accounts having been billed for services they never questioned because the amounts were small relative to their overall consulting budgets and the invoices were professionally formatted, received full restitution from the forfeited funds. The federal charges against me were formally dropped 5 months before his guilty plea, once the government's own forensic analysis confirmed everything I had documented in that 12-page memo. The agent, to her credit, called me personally to tell me, she said, and I'm going to get this approximately right, that in her experience, most people in my situation either shut down completely or made the mistake of trying to confront the subject directly before the evidence was secure. She said my approach had made her job considerably easier. I said that I had spent 15 years learning to let the documents speak. She said that it showed. I filed for divorce the week after charges were dropped. I kept the house, the mortgage was in my name, and the down payment had come from my savings, a fact I had not thought about in years, but which turned out to matter considerably in the property settlement. I kept the dog. He kept a storage unit in southeast Portland that I had not known existed and did not ask about. My attorney handled the rest. I went back to work full-time the month after the divorce was finalized. My firm had been extraordinarily decent about all of it. They had, in fact, been the ones who flagged the discrepancy in my billing records to my supervisor early in the investigation, which had helped establish my timeline. I appreciated that more than I could say at the time, and more than I've probably said to them since. There are things I notice differently now. I notice when someone has access to something they didn't ask for. I notice when helpfulness is offered at a volume that doesn't quite match the situation. I notice when someone knows more about your professional life than you've told them. I don't think these are bad things to notice. I think, if I'm honest, I should have been noticing them all along. Not because noticing would have made me harder or colder or less willing to build a life with someone, but because paying attention to the places where things don't add up is not a professional skill, it's a human one. And I had spent so many years applying it to other people's problems that I had forgotten it was available to me for my own. The thing that they forgot, the thing that unraveled everything, that made the whole structure collapse faster than they had probably planned for, was the device ID. He had created the fraudulent email account on the coffee shop's public Wi-Fi, which felt anonymous to him because he wasn't using his home network and wasn't using his registered work device. But he had used his personal laptop. His personal laptop had a device fingerprint, a unique identifier that the email provider logged at account creation, the way they do for every account, because it's a fraud prevention measure. He hadn't cleared it, hadn't thought to. The device fingerprint matched the laptop they pulled from his bag when he was arrested, the one with all the memos. He was meticulous about everything except the thing he didn't know to be meticulous about. I think about that sometimes. How the whole architecture of a deception can stand up for years and then fall because of one piece the builder didn't account for. How the place where something breaks is almost never where you're looking. How the gap between what someone knows and what they think they know is exactly the size of the thing that catches them. I think about it professionally. when I'm tracing a client's irregular transactions and looking for the first wrong entry. And I think about it personally. When I am sitting in a house that is only mine now, with a dog named after a Supreme Court justice, and a mortgage I am managing fine on my own, thank you, and a job that I am very good at, the ripples are still there, if I look for them. I don't look for them as often as I used to. Mostly, I just do the work and let the documents speak, and remember that the numbers always tell the truth eventually, even when the people who arranged them were counting on you not to notice. I noticed.